and welcome to another episode of Robbinsdale Revisited. In the 1950s, Robbinsdale becomes a fully developed suburb with plenty of people. So many new homes were built that the city council reapportioned the wards. The school district expands, and the baby boom filled 19 elementary schools, 2 junior highs, and 2 high schools. A new post office was dedicated in 1951, and the Terrace Theater opened in 1952. The old village hall was torn down in 1954. Now, Pete Ritchie, the president of the Robbinsdale Historical Society, will tell us more about the 1950s. Where do you want to start with the 1950s?
Well, to tell you the truth, I almost always start with the Terrace Theater, but that's really not until 1951. The thing that's worth mentioning is from 1940 to 1950, Robbinsdale's population increases 87.6%, which is just huge. This place really filled in. So by the time you get to 1950, we got 11,289 souls in the city of Robbinsdale. Here's Robbinsdale, nestled into the rolling hills north and west of Minneapolis. The city slept soundly through the first half of the 20th century. In the years that followed World War II, residents of the little bedroom community woke up to a building boom. During the 1940s and 50s, Robbinsdale added over 10,000 souls. Inside the city's 3 square miles, houses, schools, shopping centers just appeared overnight. Robbinsdale looked a lot like Riverdale at the dawn of the fabulous 50s. There were drive-ins, soda fountains, sock hops over at the high school. People still did their shopping downtown. Along West Broadway, you could find Julie's Menswear, Heckenmuller Meats, the Ben Franklin 5 and Dime, Eva's Clothing, 3 drugstores, a couple supermarkets, 2 lumber yards, and 3 hardware stores. And while Archie and Jughead looked over hot rods outside the Tower Garage, Betty and Veronica could catch a matinee movie at the Robin Theater or grab a cherry Coke at Mueller's Soda Fountain. Okay, so the decade of the 1950s is really busy, and there's tons of school activities. In 1950, Robbinsdale's high school, at the Robbinsdale High School, the 24-year-old second-year coach, Ed Kerman, took the basketball team to the Lake Conference District 18 Region 5 competitions. The Robins entered the state basketball tournament for the first time. The team lost to Duluth 42-40, but the town was thrilled, so all the businesses closed up and down West Broadway. Mueller's had a special thing for the team when they came back. As the losing team from the state championship, he opened up the soda fountain, and all high school kids got to come in and have sodas and drinks for free. And we have these pictures of the team sitting there at the soda fountain, and they were treated like heroes. Here at the Robbinsdale Historical Society, we have the key to the city that was presented to the basketball team. This was the biggest thing that had ever happened. Robbinsdale heads to the state championships, and then they lose. We love a loser here in the city of Robbinsdale. And these guys, for years later, as they're establishing themselves in business, one of them had started a popcorn machine business, which just seems to be a theme in Robbinsdale. There was a guy who had a real estate business, a hauling business, and they would all kind of advertise themselves as members of that 1950s team that went to the state championship. It was a big deal. In downtown Robbinsdale, some construction's going on. We get a brand new bank building on the corner of 42nd and West Broadway. All over the city, not only do we have these neighborhoods filling in, but we have houses being built at a rate that is, 1,000 a month sometimes. There's just so much construction going on, and there's churches going up everywhere. So in addition to schools, a community that's this big is going to need a whole bunch of churches. So Elam Church builds a new church in the 1950s. Redeemer builds a new church that they actually end up tearing down in the 1960s, but on that spot on 42nd and Regent, Redeemer Lutheran Church builds a great big church. And just across the highway, 1,000 feet away, the Faith Lilac Way builds another Lutheran church. And we have dozens of churches. The Olivet Evangelical United Brethren Church goes up. The Congregational Church hasn't done it yet, but they're thinking about building a new church. Their church is still standing there on Bottineau Boulevard and 42nd. In addition to all the churches, the school board is looking at how many students they're going to have. And at Lee School, you've got 1,600 students, 1,400 PTA members, 37 teachers, and it's the largest school population Lee ever had. And then 1952, Adair School, just on the other side of Adair Avenue, and this was later called Fair School, opens up. So in 1951, 6 employees of the Robbinsdale Post, including H.O. Sonneson, purchased the Post Publishing Company. The others were Wayne Nelson, Harold Johnson, Leroy Westerlin. Sonneson, a beloved editor, lived in Robbinsdale and was very interested in all Robbinsdale doings. He worked up until the day he died, December 20th, 1969, at the age of 69. And he's listed in Who's Who in America, Volume 5, 1969 to 1973. The Sonnesons lived over on Orchard Avenue. So again, what I always come back to in the 1950s is it's the decade that the terrace is built. And we'll talk a little bit about William and Sidney Volk's business. So these guys were Lithuanian immigrants, and they arrive in the Twin Cities in the early teens. By the 1920s, they've decided that they're going to go into the movie theater business. One of the first theaters they own is called the Falls Theater, and it's down there in South Minneapolis along Mayhaw Avenue. Then they take on the Camden Theater, which is up here in North Minneapolis, over in the Camden neighborhood, and not far from Robbinsdale. I think a lot of us remember going to the Camden Theater because it was a dollar theater when I was a kid. But the theater had already been built. When the Volks acquired it, it was kind of in a rough shape, and they hired this architectural firm, Liebenberg and Kaplan, and they give it kind of an Art Deco modern look to it. And one of the things they add are these little rooms up at the back of the theater, little glass enclosed rooms, and you could rent one out for a party, or if you had a crying baby, you could go up there. And so this became a theme in a lot of their movie theaters. So they're doing well with the Camden and the Falls Theater, and then they decide they're going to build a theater in South Minneapolis. It doesn't go as well as they think, and they end up acquiring the Nile Theater, which was down there on 38th Avenue near 24th. And they do kind of the same thing. They take an older theater, they remodel it, give it kind of an Art Deco streamlined look. They put the little crying rooms or the party rooms in the back of the theater. And the Nile's a beautiful thing. It's got this sort of Egyptian motif throughout the inside of the theater, and there are frescoes on the wall that give you an idea that you're somewhere in Egypt, and they have pyramids in the background. And so they really play up on the theme. And so between the Nile, the Camden, and the Falls, these guys are starting to do well. And the 1930s comes along, they're filling their pockets. And by the end of the 1930s, they acquire the Robin Theater in Robbinsdale. And so now we got a little theater chain of 4 theaters. And they had plans to build a great big thing up here in Robbinsdale during World War II. The government said, no, we're not gonna okay any theater construction at this time because of the war and the war effort and the materials that are going to be needed. So it isn't until 1951 they decide that they have everything in place and they can build their showcase theater for their entire chain here in Robbinsdale. So once again, they tap this Liebenberg and Kaplan architectural firm. Now, these guys had done theaters all over the state, mostly Art Deco and streamlined modern. They had never really done something that looked like the Terrace. I mean, the Terrace is this kind of mid-century modern. It has elements about it that make it feel like a living room at that time period. There's a sunken den with some seating and some great big windows that at that time looked out on the swamps on the south side of Crystal Lake, and you could probably see the lake off there in the distance. But most of the work that these guys had done, was more like this Art Deco stuff from the 1930s. So this was a big departure for them. But they had their marching orders from Sidney and William, and they went to work on it. And what they came out with was so incredible. This great big tower that went up like 3 stories into the sky, and it lit up, and they could flash different colors on these paneled glass that were in the tower. So it looked like the entire tower was flashing and changing color. You had these great big lights on the top that spelled the terrace in both directions. So, for miles around, you could see the terrace. It was on kind of the highest point on the hill up above Crystal Lake. The north and east sides of the building featured these bold geometric forms and a row of dramatically tilted plate glass windows 80 feet long and 20 feet high, a red brick tower set with backlit glass and crowned by mirrored signs anchored the northwest corner of the building and proclaimed the Terrace Theater to all of Robbinsdale. On the Volk brothers, they spared no expense in the construction of their flagship theater. Cost estimates for the building were between $700,000 and $1 million. And I always remember this story of this guy who came into the Historical Society one time, and he says he was, walking by the terrace one time, and he was just aimlessly wandering, and he went and was looking at the building, and Sidney Volk, one of the owners, was sitting outside on a little bench, and he sees this guy eyeing up the building, and he says, "Hey." And the guy says, "Yeah." He says, I own this theater, And it's like, "Oh, well, how about that?" He says, "Yeah, this place cost me $1 million. This is $1 million theater. Do you believe that? Look at it. It's just beautiful." And this guy just always remembers this conversation. And I guess if I was Sidney Volk and I was sitting there and somebody's eyeing up the theater, I might want to brag about it a little bit too. But this really was their pride and joy. We know that William Volk actually left the business and just left it to Sidney to run in the early 60s. And he went and opened up a pancake house just if you follow up 81 almost into Crystal, that's where his pancake house was. And I think the building was actually featured in that Feeling Minnesota movie in the 80s that had Keanu Reeves in it. And at that time, it had become like a 1950s diner, but it was originally this little pancake house. So, in 1951, you've got this incredible theater there, and we'll talk a little bit more about it. But the Volks also own the Robin Theater, and it's still in operation until the early 50s. And the Volks acquired the bowling alley. And at one point, they had the Terrace Theater has a giant unfinished basement. Or it did until they tore it down and put the Hy-Vee there. And it had a dirt floor down that basement. And the idea was that they were going to put a bowling alley in the bottom of the terrace. It never happened, but they had plenty of room for it. It ended up just being a storage area. If you went around to the back of the terrace, you would see these big doors that kind of opened up into this area. And maybe they parked a couple trucks down there. But the inside of the terrace, it was warm. There was elegant brick, stone, wood, and copper was used throughout. It reflected like mid-century modern residential trends. And then it had kind of a sterility, kind of an international style, atomic age commercial buildings had. To the right of the entrance, there were niches carved out of the main lobby for a candy counter and a snack bar. Fine fixtures and finishes included walnut-clad popcorn machine, a 2-level copper wishing well drinking fountain. There was Turkish loomed carpeting, and it just went on and on. They bought the finest rugs they could. The same rugs are used in the Radio City Music Hall and in the United States Supreme Court building. And we just know this because Sidney liked to brag about everything in that theater, and he told reporters these things. So looking across the lobby from the auditorium doors, you had this sunken lounge, and this was immediately off the foyer. Moviegoers found an inviting little smoking area, and it was designed and it was enlarged and impeccably decorated with a mid-century modern den. The lounge was rimmed off by a lone stone wall, and that enclosed a long tier of cushioned seats. A copper-hooded fireplace was nestled between the enormous slanted windows, and an array of potted plants were everywhere. And when you look at old pictures of the terrace, not only are there potted plants, but there's these floral arrangements. And, it's probably because they knew the photographer was coming. But I've seen pictures in the Golden Valley High School yearbook where this couple's out on a date. I think it's 1965. And they're at the terrace. So this is, 15 years after the theater is opened. And there's just flowers everywhere. It looks like a funeral home, or there's just these arrangements, and they're up on pedestals or on these little stands. And I think they just love to have flowers all over the place.
And they had some really cool lights too, right?
Yep, lots of cool hanging lights. And then inside the auditorium, there was sort of this semicircular stage, and it was approached by carpeted steps and broken by these little square stone planters all along the perimeter. Of course, why would you have planters inside a dark theater? I'm guessing maybe some of these flowers were artificial, it's just hard to see. So the theater had 1,299 plush seats, and the reason was the Volk brothers were superstitious. If you had 1,300 seats, that was gonna spell trouble. So we just couldn't have that many seats. And if you ever go into South Minneapolis at the Riverview Theater, the auditorium looks a lot like the terrace. These square panels all along the walls that are supposed to help with the acoustics. It's kind of like the Riverview Theater has 800 seats. So if you just imagine 500 more seats in that little theater. So this place was giant. There was a 26-foot screen. The restrooms at the terrace were gorgeously appointed with marble counters and inset lighting. And there was a built-in planter in the ladies' room. And there was a smoking lounge just outside the men's room. At a time when home air conditioning was still pretty much unaffordable, the terrace's cooling system just kept the place icy. So whenever you see old advertisements for movies in the summer, you'll have these icicles dripping on it, and they'll say, air conditioned. The other thing that old advertisements for the terrace always are advertising is free coffee. So when you come in, you get free coffee. And there was a hostess named Elaine Jensen who everybody remembers because she was the one that would hand you your free cup of coffee, and sometimes you would get a free donut too. And so when you came into the theater, there was this hostess that was going to greet you, and they really wanted to make this place seem like an event when you went out to eat. And when the terrace comes out, this is when television is first coming around, and the Volk brothers, rather than being nervous about television and it's going to put the movies, who's going to come to the movie theater, they're just like, you know what? People want to go out, and, nobody's going to be satisfied to just sit home and eat a TV dinner. But we're not afraid of television. In fact, we're going to put a television in the terrace. So the terrace had this television room that was still there when I was a kid. And, you just had a few seats and some more floral arrangements and all the pictures. And then there was this TV there. And so I'm guessing, if a game is on and you've maybe brought your wife to the movie theater and maybe you're a football fan, you run out to the lobby every once in a while and check the score on the TV. Or if you just want to watch a little TV before the movie starts, the Volks were like, we're not afraid of television. We're just going to embrace it. So come on in. The day before the terrace opens, there's sort of a little tragedy struck, and it's in all the newspapers. You see this picture of this black cloud of smoke as it's rising toward the sky, and it can be seen all over North Minneapolis. As it turns out, 10,000 gallons of fuel oil seeped out of that basement. Remember, we were talking about the basement not having just a dirt floor because they didn't quite finish that. The engineer decided that it was unusual, and he's like, this is a problem. And for some reason, rather than dealing with it in a way that we might do in the 21st century, he just decides he's going to pump all this oil into the swamp that's nearby. So that seems like a problem, but, I'm sure it smelled. But the real problem came because a couple small boys are out there playing with matches, and they light the swamp on fire, and the flames they soar so high that in North Minneapolis, residents all over Robbinsdale are coming up here to see what the smoke is like. And the traffic on West Broadway is backed up for miles because everybody's getting in their car to see what this giant black cloud of smoke is coming from Robbinsdale. Not an auspicious beginning, but nothing burned down other than the swamp. They took forever to build the new Hy-Vee grocery store, and I know they were doing all sorts of environmental cleanup there for a variety of reasons. There may have been some asbestos in the terrace, although the city spent a lot of money during the 80s or the 90s, I guess. At some point, I can't remember when, the city decided they were going to clean out the asbestos in the theater before it was decided that it was going to be torn down. So a lot of environmental cleanup happened where Hy-Vee was going on. I can't help but wonder if some of that environmental cleanup wasn't related to the 10,000 gallon oil spill, or maybe it all just burned up. That being said, everything, went off without a hitch, and the terrace managed to open up. Father's Little Dividend was the first movie, and it was a big event. They brought out the mayor. They brought out Cedric Adams from WCCO, who was our big local media personality. Business Week offered kind of a skeptical view of the terrace. They said that last May, 2 Minneapolis movie theater owners pulled a stunt that made every other exhibitor in the area decide they had blown their lids sky high. In nearby Robbinsdale, Minnesota, William and Sidney Volk opened a movie theater that had cost them $1 million to build. Since television seemed to have put the movie business solidly on the skids, it looked like an elaborate way to commit suicide. So nobody thought this was a great idea when they opened this movie theater. And what made it a little bit of a dent in their business to begin with is the Volks thought, we spent all this money on this movie theater. We're showing first-run movies. Well, at that time, all the first-run movies were being shown downtown, and the downtown theater owners had made deals with the Hollywood studios that you will bring the first-run movies to downtown, then the little theaters out in the neighborhoods and out in the suburbs. And the Volks are like, we're not a little theater. This is like the biggest theater in the state. It wasn't, but it was a good sized one. So they dragged that back and forth to court for a while. They did have to put up with just having second run movie theaters initially, and then they got the first run movies. In the meantime, they brought in some entertainment. They would bring in an opera singer and put her out on the stage.
Did you go to the theater a lot when you were a kid?
I was there all the time.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, the other thing that I loved about the Terrace is it really was someplace you could take somebody to impress them. And one of my favorite memories of the Terrace is some neighbors down the block had a Spanish foreign exchange student. And most of the time she was being entertained. This family had two daughters and they were thick as thieves, and the daughters were both learning Spanish. And so they were all really good friends. And most of the time she was pretty entertained. But for some reason, the two daughters had to go somewhere, left town for something, and she had a couple days where there was just nobody, and they just thought, well, Pete lives down the block, and he can take her out. And I was pretty excited because she was really nice looking. And I had been set up on this date that I would have never had the courage to ask her out. And so, well, what do we do? Well, we should go to the Terrace. It's 3 or 4 blocks away. We can walk down there. It'll be really fun. I didn't understand that she spoke far less English than I had imagined. I don't know. I hadn't encountered her in school or anything. I have no idea how she made it around to her classes. And, cause we were just having a heck of a time, communicating. But, we weren't that far away from the Terrace. It was hard to believe that she had never seen the place, because if you drive by it, you just noticed it, but maybe she hadn't. And so as we're walking up to the thing, I look over and I can just see her eyes getting so big as she's looking up at this tower of light and the Terrace Theater and all. And she just kept saying, it's big. It's so big. It's so big. And I thought, yeah, I suppose it is. Everything in America is big. But she was really impressed with that place. And so were most of the people that went into it. It was just it was something you remember. So the other thing we should talk about in the 1950s, though, is shopping. This is downtown Robbinsdale is still a place where people are coming to shop. There's clothing stores and shoe stores and hardware stores. And at the beginning of the 1950s, again, this is unless you're over in North Minneapolis, and as you go down West Broadway, of course, there's quite a bit of business. But coming north, there's not much until you get to Robbinsdale. And then in 1955, for years, they had talked about this swamp that sits between Crystal Lake and Twin Lake. And they had propositioned the county a number of times to build a canal from Crystal Lake to Twin Lake, because wouldn't it be great to take your boat? You could start down there by where Lakeview Terrace Park is, across the lake from the terrace, and you would be able to paddle just like in the Minneapolis lakes. And then you would come to a little canal, and then you would get to Twin Lake, and you could paddle across lower Twin Lake. At this time, you've got Highway 100 crossing the lake, but they have a little spot there where boats can get through, and then you could be in the middle Twin Lake, and you could paddle all the way to upper Twin Lake. That paddle would be like 4 or 5 miles, so it would be a big deal. But they looked at the levels of those lakes, and if you had cut that canal over to Crystal Lake would probably benefit. It would get more water, but Twin Lake would probably become a much smaller lake, as the kind of like the way Cedar Lake became smaller when they cut a canal over to Lake of the Isles. So they decide not to do it. They don't have the funding for it. It doesn't seem like it's the right thing to do engineering wise. So they take that swamp and they put a whole bunch of wooden pylons all over the swamp, and they build a shopping center and a parking lot on it. And that becomes Robbins Center. And, it's strange to think of a strip mall as creating so much excitement and generating so much enthusiasm. But if you look at suburban history around the Twin Cities, these little strip malls meant a lot to those communities, whether it was Robbins Center. Of course, you have Golden Valley Center, wasn't that far away. In St. Louis Park, there's Texatonka and these other little places where there's these strip malls. And that's where everybody gathered up. And not only did you have your big chain stores that would come into the strip malls, when Robbins Center opens up, you get a country club market. The closest one before that was way down on West Broadway. There was a country club market. Of course, we had a Red Owl that was up there along the main drag in downtown, but now we got two big grocery stores. And when Robbins Center opens up, the first half of it, the Robbinsdale City Band comes out for a command performance. KSTP brings out this guy named Bill Ingram, and we've got some Merwin Drug has relocated to Robbins Center. Sears Roebuck is there. Sherwin-Williams, Brown Photo. There's a Woolworth. There's this country club market, and it's just a huge deal. And of course, we get Brookdale a few years later, but before that, Robbins Center was as closest as we had to a shopping mall, a modern shopping mall. And there's all this parking and a great big neon sign out on what was Highway 52 and later became Highway 81. And, anybody who grows up in Robbinsdale remembers Robbins Center, not only for the shops and stores. In my case, the Wax Museum was my favorite store. Merwin Drug still had a restaurant in the back of it, not a soda fountain, but, it was a place where, it was just a family restaurant in the back of the drugstore. So you'd go, you do your little shopping, pick up your prescription, go sit down and have a meal in these nice booths with yellow pleather. And I remember the pizza burger as being something really delicious that they had at Merwin Drug, and I couldn't find it anywhere else. The other big event in Robbinsdale is, of course, we had built a high school in 1936, 1937. But by the time we get to 1956, that high school is nowhere near big enough. Not only do you have a dare school being built, but you've got a brand new high school. So the 1950s is a decade when we're building so many schools in the district. And probably the biggest deal was the Robbinsdale High School that was being built over on Toledo. So in 1956, I love looking through these old yearbooks we have at the Historical Society. And in 1956, in the first page of the yearbook, it starts with our school. What memorable things this school has meant to so many. But to the seniors of 56, they have been given the great honor of being the last senior class to graduate from these proud halls. The new RHS awaits the high schoolers of tomorrow, but it is graduates of today who are left alone in the sacred halls of the old edifice to bid a last fond farewell. True, the old Robbinsdale High School building may crumble and decay, but the lessons we've learned, the sacrifices we've made, the memories which are ours alone, can feel neither the crumbling hand of time nor the indifference that comes from forgetfulness. Yet how wonderful it is in this parting that we know it is not the end, but the beginning of new lives which will have ample opportunities to make use of great lessons taught in this school.
Thanks for listening. I'm Crystal Boyd. Robbinsdale Revisited is brought to you by the Robbinsdale Historical Society. Our little history museum is located at 4915 42nd Avenue North in the heart of Robbinsdale. We're open Fridays and Saturdays from 10 to 3. You can also visit us online at robbinsdale.org. You found this episode, so you know where to find the next one.
Bicycle into the city every Saturday to see our friends. Bus back home, sitting hand in hand when the evening ends. Oh, when the evening ends. Oh, when the evening ends in Robbinsdale. In Robbinsdale.
Our theme music is provided by Gabe Barnett and Them Rounders.